What's up guys, Filterless here. In this video we're going to be comparing the OLED Steam Deck to the Ally in 6 different battery tests to see how it compares under light load and heavy load in multiple different games. And for our first test we have Insurgency Sandstorm. You can see here we're running 720p on both devices. You can also see the TDP limit that I had to set on both, and the objective here was to hit 60 FPS on both. It's really hard to see on the Ally, but the Ally is also right at 60 FPS. And down here at the bottom left, we have a timer just showing us how long the test has been running. So if we fast forward a little, we can see it start counting up pretty quickly. Up here at the top, we have the battery percent for the Steam Deck, as well as the total system draw right here. So it's showing about 14.5 watts. And then down here, we have the Ally that shows the percentage, as well as the total system draw. Again, you can see around 21 watts. We started this test at 78%, and we're going to run it for about 30 minutes just to see what kind of drain we get. So here I'm just going to fast forward a little bit, and we're going to get to 15 minutes. You can watch the watt draw here, the percentages if you'd like. And then here at 15 minutes, we're at about 63% on the Ally and 72 on the Steam Deck. So let's go ahead and fast forward a little bit more and just see what happens as we hit that 30-minute mark down here. You can see here we're about to cross that 30-minute mark, and this is where I take the values as soon as we hit that 30 minutes. We're at 48% and 65% on the Steam Deck. And jumping over to the chart here at 720p with that 9 watts on the Steam Deck and 13 watts on the Ally, we would get roughly 3 hours and 50 minutes of battery life from 100% down to 0, because we only lost about 13% in 30 minutes. So that'd be 26% in an hour. And on the Ally, we lost about 30% in those 30 minutes, and that would get us right at an hour and 40 minutes of battery life. And for this next test, we are at 77%, and we're running 800p on the Steam Deck, so native resolution, and 900p on the Ally. The reason I chose 900p is 1080p requires a ton of extra power, as we'll see here in a minute. And 900p is what I usually run, but you can see here we had to increase that TDP quite a bit to maintain the 60 FPS. You can see it's about 58, 59, and then right at 60 on the Steam Deck with a 10 watt TDP, so we only had to go from 9 to 10 watts. So here I'm just going to fast forward for a minute. If you want to watch the battery percentages as they drop, we still have that total system draw right here, and we're going to freeze it right at the 15-minute mark. All right, we just crossed the 15 minutes, and we're at about 58% on the Ally and about 70% on the Steam Deck. And right here, I realized the RGB lights were on, so I turned those off, and it basically made no difference in that watt usage. So it's pretty much the same. So if you leave these on, you're not going to have a whole lot of extra draw. And then we'll go ahead and just fast forward to the 30-minute mark, and you can just see them dropping right here. We're at about 48, 47, 65%. And we just crossed the 30-minute mark. You can see 39% on the Ally, 62 on the Steam Deck. Let's go ahead and fast forward a little bit more. Some of these tests I ran a little bit longer, but I'm taking the values right at 30 minutes for the charts, and we can see right before I end the test at a little after 35 minutes, right about 60% on the Steam Deck and 32 on the Ally, drawing about 26 watts versus about 16. And then here we can see on the Steam Deck, we lost about 15% in 30 minutes. So we get right at 3 hours and 20 minutes at that 800p resolution. And then on the Ally, we lost about 38% battery life. So we get right at 1 hour and 19 minutes of battery life. That is at 900p, and both of these are at 60 frames per second. Then moving on to the last Insurgency test, we're running these wide open. There's no TDP limit here, so that's going to be 15 watts on the OLED Steam Deck and 30 watts on the Ally. We'll go ahead and fast forward a little bit. We started at 78% on both, and you can see 43 watts being used on the Ally and about 22 on the Steam Deck, so they're both drawing quite a bit more power. And another thing to note is you can see we're at 15 watts on the Steam Deck, and we only got about 10 FPS. At 10 watts, we were at 60, and that's kind of the same thing with the Ally. You don't get a whole lot for this last bit of wattage, so you definitely wouldn't want to run 30 watts. You'd want to do more like 23 on the Ally and about 12 or so on the Steam Deck if you're looking for the best power efficiency. And then here we're about to hit 15 minutes. We just hit 15 minutes. We're at 46% on the Ally and 68% on the Steam Deck. And if you can't see it, you can see here we're at about 70 FPS on the Steam Deck. And then over here on the Ally, we're at about 52. This is at 1080p, which is much harder to run than at 900p or 720p. Let's go ahead and fast forward and get to that 30-minute mark real quick. And you can see it's just draining down rather quickly. This test wouldn't be able to run much longer. Another thing I want to point out is it looks like it went into some power saving mode, so it's only pulling about 37 or so. And the Steam Deck's still right at 22 watts. And here we are, just hit 30, 15%, 57% on the Steam Deck when they're just wide open like this. And here's our chart. You can see just max, no TDP limit here. And you can see after about 30 minutes, we lost 21% on the Steam Deck and about 63% on the Ally. So we would get around 2 hours and 22 minutes of battery life on the Steam Deck. And we get around 47 minutes of battery life on the Ally. And here's a chart showing all three runs, the 720p, 800p, 900p, and max, if you want to pause it and just take a look at the differences. Next up, we have Bioshock, and this is at 79% on both where we're starting them. And this one is going to be run for a whole hour. And you can see here on an older game like this, we only need 6 watts of TDP for the Steam Deck and only 7 watts on the Ally, so pretty close. On the Steam Deck, the image is just stretched, but they're both at 720p. And we can see here, we're going to fast forward just a little bit. We can see we're eating about 8 watts on the Steam Deck and right at 10 to 11 on the Ally. Since this is a pretty long test, I'm going to fast forward really fast just so we can get through it. You can watch the percentages dropping, and this one is definitely a lot closer than some of the other tests. So in this game, you're going to get great battery life on both. Another thing to note, if we zoom in, you can see the Ally is actually running around 67 or so FPS. And I couldn't set it lower without the FPS dipping down into around the 40-ish range or so. So this is just slightly higher FPS than what we're getting on the Steam Deck. Let's go ahead and fast forward and we'll hit that 30-minute mark, which is going to be the halfway point. So here at 30 minutes, we're at 66% on the Ally and 72% on the Steam Deck. We'll go ahead and fast forward a bit more. And I also wanted to point out the frame rate is a bit more stable on the Steam Deck. This is showing the FPS, so this is not a frame time graph like we have right here. But either way, it is fluctuating a little bit more on the Ally. It doesn't enjoy these lower TDP ranges as much as the Steam Deck does. All right, here we are, just about to hit 60 minutes. There we go. And we're at 52% on the Ally, 64 on the Steam Deck. So this is a very close test. And here we can take a look at the chart. This is an hour-long chart, so 60 minutes instead of the 30 minutes. And we lost about 15% on the Steam Deck, which would give us right at 6 hours and 40 minutes of playtime. On the Ally, we lost about 27%, and that would still give us 3 hours and 42 minutes. So definitely a game that you can enjoy on both for quite a while. Now jumping on to a much more demanding game, we have Cyberpunk, and the objective here was to hold right at 40 FPS on both. And we are right at 40 FPS with a 13 watt TDP on the Ally and right at 40 with a 10 watt TDP on the Steam Deck. They're both at 720p as well. And we started the test at 79% battery. So I'm going to go ahead and fast forward, and it looks like we're only using about 5 extra watts on the Ally. One thing to note, the Ally does have a 40 watt hour battery. The Steam Deck has a 50. And here at 15 minutes, we're at about 65% on the Ally and 72 on the Steam Deck. Let's go ahead and fast forward this a bit more and just see what we wind up at 30 minutes. And we're just about to cross over. There we go, 30 minutes, and we're at 51% on the Ally, 65 on the Steam Deck. And taking a look at the chart, this is 30 minutes again, and we lost about 14% in 30 minutes. So that would give us right at 3 hours and 34 minutes of battery life on the Steam Deck. And then on the Ally, we lost 28%, so almost 1% per minute. And that would give us roughly 1 hour and 46 minutes of battery life. Then jumping over to the final test, we have Stardew Valley. This is the lightest game. We're starting at 79% on both. We're not using a TDP limit. Instead, we have the Ally set to 60 Hz refresh rate, and it's in silent mode. The Steam Deck is also set to 60 Hz, so it's not the 90. We're using a 60 FPS cap, which changes the screen to 60 Hz, so they're both going to be exactly the same. And we're running the native resolution on both, so that would be 1080p on the Ally and 800p on the Steam Deck. And this is a really light game. You can see the Ally is right at 800 megahertz. It's really not going above above that because it doesn't need to. And the power draw on the Steam Deck is just ridiculous. I don't know how it's using a half a watt for the CPU and less than a half a watt or right at a half a watt for the GPU. That's just crazy. So we ran this test for an hour, so I'm going to go ahead and fast forward, and you can see this is also going to be decently close, but we're using around 7 watts on the Ally and only about 5 watts on the Steam Deck. When you pair it with that bigger battery, it does start to make a difference. Also, in all of these tests, the screen brightness is about the same to my eyes. This is just the camera picking up the white on the Ally and I think adjusting it slightly so it might look like the Steam Deck's brighter, but they're pretty much the same. And here we are at 30 minutes. We're still at 70% on the Ally and 75% on the Steam Deck. Let's go ahead and fast forward this a bit more. This test I actually ran for almost an hour and a half, but we're going to take that value at the 60-minute mark so we can calculate it out on a graph. All right, and we're about to hit 60 minutes. There we go. We just hit 60 and the Ally's at 60%. The Steam Deck is at 70%. So this is roughly double the battery life on the Steam Deck. The Ally seems to be draining about twice as fast. And then taking a look at the chart, this is an hour-long chart. You can see we lost 9% at the 60-minute mark on the Steam Deck, which will give us a little over 11 hours of battery life. And then on the Ally, we lost 19% at that 60-minute mark, and that would give us right at 5 hours and 16 minutes. And that leads us to the conclusion, and in a lot of games, you're going to get roughly double the battery life, especially when capping FPS and not maxing the systems out. And when you do max the systems all the way out, the Ally is going to drain almost 3 times faster. So what I recommend is on the Ally to set a lower TDP like 17 watts at 900p, and then on the Steam Deck you can run 800p, and I would set a 45 FPS cap in most games. That's what I'm doing, keeps the display at 90 Hz. And this isn't so much a guide, I was just really interested to see the battery life differences between them, because when I was playing games, it just seemed a bit off, just like this, 5 watts versus 7 watts, but it's draining almost twice as fast. And I'd say the reporting probably isn't that accurate. It'd be interesting to use the exact same tool on both that could measure it properly, just to see what the actual total draw is, to see if it matches these numbers we're seeing up here. But anyway, I hope y'all enjoyed the video and the battery test. I'm hoping to do more of an optimization guide on both the Steam Deck OLED of what settings I would personally use, as well as the Ally, just to get better battery life on both of them. If you did enjoy the video, consider hitting the like button and sub button, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.